Hi, I'm Nick Bailey. I'm a co-founder of From Day One. In today's webinar, we're going to be exploring a really relevant topic, bridging the voice gap, how diverse points of view can help a company thrive. Lately, we've seen an increasing number of employees across industries rise up to protest corporate policies. Recently, employees at Amazon, Facebook, the Wall Street Journal, and many others have made headlines calling their company's practices into question, forcing corporate leaders to publicly address their workforce concerns. The employees want to speak up, but they're often thwarted. So how can companies encourage whistleblowers, dissenters, or just outspoken employees who perhaps might be challenging the status quo? Those conversations can often be very complicated. They can be uncomfortable, but they can also help keep companies from losing their way. Before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partners, Speakfully, Lumapps, and Achievers. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one. Speakfully was created to help individuals navigate workplace experiences safely and discreetly, while giving HR and people leaders real-time insights and metrics into workplace culture. Whether we see it or not, bias, bullying, gossip, hostile instances are happening within every organization, and Speakfully is passionate about giving employees a voice to cultivate safer, more transparent, more successful work environments. Lumapps is a social and collaborative enterprise communication platform designed to connect, inform, and engage employees no matter where they're working. This innovative digital workplace equips organizations to break down silos, streamline internal communication, and provide a space for employees to belong and to have a purpose. Fully integrated with your productivity suite, Lumapps simplifies access to all corporate content, business apps, and social features in one place. Achievers, employee voice and recognition solutions, bring your organization's values and strategy to life. You can activate employee participation and fuel a culture of performance to experience data-driven business results. Now, a couple logistical items. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be made available on demand within about 24 hours or so after the event. So look out for an email from us in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have information on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM or SHRM. And look out for a written account of this conversation soon on our website. That's fromday1.co, FROMDAYONE.co. Around 3 p.m., that's 1 hour from now for those in different time zones, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time, including right now or at any time during the session, using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and they'll be answered as we get towards the end of the session. So now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, the business journalist, Lydia Dishman. She reports and edits for Fast Company on tech and leadership, and has written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, the New York Times, and many others. Thanks so much, and Lydia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you to my panelists for being with me today. I am thrilled to be leading this very timely discussion. Of course, I say that, and it seems like all the discussions we've been having lately are extremely timely in these unprecedented times. I'd also like to welcome all the attendees. Thank you all for spending an hour and a half with us. I hope that we deliver a very lively, engaging, and insightful discussion for you. Today, I read about a study that was done on activism out of USC Annenberg School, and it found that people thought that, or believed that CEOs actually have a greater ability to affect change, more so than even politicians or journalists. But companies aren't always ready to work with activists. And when I say activists, as Nick mentioned earlier, we've seen employees rise up to protest corporate policy, and it's not just about protesting in the street, it can be anywhere at any time. So with that in mind, I was thinking about leadership and how leadership, even team leadership, affects how employees can express themselves. So I'd like all of my panelists to introduce themselves and their companies and briefly tell us about a time when they felt as though they were really seen and heard by a colleague or manager, because that's, I think, the start of true activism. So Erin, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erin Bramblett, and I'm the head of human resources at Communities and Schools of Atlanta. We are a nonprofit organization that serves at-risk youth and actually make sure that they are empowered to be able to get their education. To answer your question, I would say that fortunately in my career, I've had many times where I've actually felt very heard and had a lot of really good organizations that I've worked with and for. You know, it makes you feel so valued, and it makes you feel so much a part of the fabric of that organization, and like you really can make change yourself. And so unfortunately, I've had very many opportunities to be able to impact change in an organization and really be heard, to be able to make things better as an HR professional for others as well as for myself. So I feel very fortunate in that respect.
Thank you. TeNita.
Hi, TeNita Ballard, lead consultant at AT&T. I do strategy for 3 segments: people with disabilities, veterans, and Asian Pacific Islanders. Lydia, your question is actually tapping into one of mine. Questions is going to be asked later, but it was most recently when the civil unrest, and I wrote a letter to my team and I shared it during the days of dialogue, and it was from the heart. It was pure. It was a time where I didn't realize that I was silent, but from that opportunity, I've been tapped in various ways, and it was just me getting out of my own way and being open to open my mouth, give my perspective, my story. And I know that I've been seen from there, and also being heard, because I think both are being important, not just seen, but to be heard as well. So that would be my answer.
I'm definitely going to come back to you on that, because I definitely want the audience to hear more about that. But
Okay,
let's,
thank you.
let's move to Corey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Flournoy. I'm the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity at Groupon, based in Chicago. And I guess a time when I felt seen and heard was actually the first boss I ever had right out of college. I worked in advertising for a company called Burnett. And on my first day of starting, he told me he has 2 responsibilities as my boss. One is to make sure I look good by giving me opportunities to grow, and to make sure that other people know that I'm good. And so by giving me opportunities to do projects in front of the executive vice president and others, which helped me to get promoted and succeed in my career. And so he was just someone who always invested in listening and giving me the opportunities for growth.
So important, especially at a first job. I think that, you know, that's a formative experience, and yeah, can't ask for better than that. Nichelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nichelle Grant. I am the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for Siemens in the U.S. Happy to be with everyone today. One of the great opportunities that I think where I was heard was actually about a year ago, when we were putting a new focus on diversity and inclusion. And looking at the organization, I put forth to the leadership that it was not only about diversity and inclusion, but also equity. And since then, I've seen a great adoption of diversity, equity, and inclusion within Siemens. We were doing it already, but for them to glam on to the point of, yeah, we need to bring more transparency to it, really let me know they were hearing me and valuing my opinion.
Absolutely. And I keep hearing more of, instead of D&I, DEI. So I think that it's trending towards equity just as much as diversity and inclusion now. Jana, last but not least, turning it over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jana Warren. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Speakfully. A time that I felt heard and listened to by a manager. There's been a few that I can recall, but one to be brief, so I'm not sitting here for hours. An organization that I was in, we just had a reorg, and that meant I had a new boss. And the new boss came in, wanted to make some pretty aggressive changes within the department. I didn't feel that those were necessarily the right things to do in that moment, considering the anxiety that was already happening with the employees because of the reorg. And so I went to him and, expressed my concerns of the why and the how. And we had lots of conversation about it. And over time, he eventually decided not to do the changes that he originally was going to do. I felt like it was going to demotivate the employees. And even to this day, he tells me that it was the best decision that he's made. And he reminds me of that because it would have been a very different outcome if he would have did that. So I think just being heard, being able to be yourself and be able to go to your leader and for them to be receptive of that is really important. And it was so in that scenario for sure.
What an incredibly validating experience. And, you know, when we talk about being heard, it really is that sort of dance between two people. You know, you have to be a good listener in order to be heard, right? And so I think about listening as a big part of building trust and creating space for employees to feel safe so that they can express their ideas and opinions. So my question to all of you, and I will go around the room again, a little lightning round. What do you think makes a good listener? You can talk about the story you've already told, or perhaps you have another anecdote. Nichelle, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. You know, when you think about listening, it's really about active listening, repeating what the person's saying, not thinking about what you're going to say, and not trying to get your point across, but really hearing the point that they're trying to give. And it's important that you confirm that this is what I heard you say back to them. And that really lets them know that you're hearing them.
Absolutely. I think that it's interesting when you are doing some active listening, how sometimes what you think you heard isn't exactly what the person is saying. Corey, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would say other part of listening is being able to listen and practice empathy. The ability to, even if it's not your own personal experience, but to be able to connect to someone's emotions, being able to connect to how it must feel to go through that experience. So listening, it requires, you know, putting your own wants and needs and desires and what you want to say aside, but really being present enough to, you know, connect.
TeNita, building on that?
The two things that I would add, number one, slow down, and then two, be open. So at times when we're listening, we could be in the middle of multiple projects, but I think it's beneficial to just slow down and actually pay attention to the person and take an interest. And then you also be open to what they're saying. Don't try to finish their thoughts in your head. Like, I know where they're coming. I know what they need. Some people like to help and fix. So you want, like, what's the solution? How can I help? Slow down, take a step back and see. Sometimes people just want to be heard. So they just need someone to listen to. So those would be my two.
Erin?
Yeah, so I would add to that really something that we need to remember is that if they felt strongly enough about something to come to you and talk to you about it, that it's important to them. It may not seem like something major or something important to you or in the big scope of things, something that's really major, but if it's important to them, they've come to you because it's important to them. So you really need to give it its due attention.
And Jana, once again.
Yeah, so this reminds me of, we had a round of interviews for Speakfully not that long ago, and one thing that actually an applicant said to me that he had learned from his boss a while back that I think it's important to say here, and it stuck with me, and it's something that I need to practice doing a lot too. But I think when people are speaking and you're listening, try not to listen to the tone, but listen to the actual words that are being said. I think sometimes it's very easy to take the tone and forget about the words, because a tone might be a tone that you might not necessarily like, but sometimes people have a hard time understanding their tone or not understanding their tone. And so it's about what they're saying, not necessarily how they're saying it, and to just think about that versus being reactive of a tone and instead being reactive of the actual words.
Yeah, I think that tone can be misinterpreted just as easily as words can be misinterpreted. And you're right, I think people don't necessarily know how they sound. I know that personally for me, and I think this is a cultural thing, you know, I'm a New Yorker and I talk fast, and I don't, do the whole pleasantry thing. I'm just like, this is what I need. This is, and, not everybody responds to that. So I've tried to soften that up a little bit, sometimes successfully, sometimes not.
And I just want to add with that, you said being from New York, but being a Black woman, sometimes when we're passionate about things, we speak fast, we can have like elevated tones, but I like what you said, Jana, to just like understand where we're coming from, because passion could be perceived as angry, but we're passionate.
Kind of like the assertive thing that they talk about with women in general. Like if you're being assertive, it comes off as a different thing. you know, and so I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about intangibles, but I always think about how many tools and resources we have at our disposal, particularly with artificial intelligence now adding a whole other layer. I'm just curious about what measures, tools, initiatives you have to put in place to allow employees to express themselves and their ideas that you can actually measure. So Erin, I'm gonna go to you first.
Sure. We do a couple of things. Some are measurable, some aren't. We actually have done some town hall sessions to allow our employees to speak openly and freely and really spend some time with us, helping us to know where they are on various different topics or just really where they are overall with everything that's been going on. We also do employee wellness surveys, well-being surveys, and we do those about every 4 to 5 weeks right now, just to make sure that with everything going on that we're giving them a place to check in and see how we're doing and how we're responding as well. And that's really more of that measurable. And then we do constant mental health check-ins, providing resources, reminding them of the resources that we have through things like benefit plans, employee assistance programs, and just other resources that we have there. I think all 3 of those things really come together to make a really good program for us.
Going over to Corey, same question. What resources, measures, tools, initiatives does Groupon have?
Sure. So I'm going to speak pre-COVID and post-COVID. So pre-COVID, we had, business resource groups and a lot of other employee engagement kind of organizations, cross-culture that really engage employees in this work, opportunities to have conversations. In this new world of working from home and everything that's happened in the world the last couple of months, one of the things that we did was shortly after the George Floyd killing is we had a global open forum for employees using Zoom. We had more than 700 employees who logged in, and who was scheduled for an hour, employees got to really share how they were feeling, how they were dealing, their sharing of their own experience, and the entire senior management team at Groupon was also part of the discussion. And it ended up being the catalyst to start a lot more work and additional conversations that Groupon is doing, including the launching of new 4 employee groups that are called Listen, Learn, Mobilize, and Support. And these are employee-driven activities where now employees are continuing conversations but doing work to help change systemic racism and within the company and externally.
Nichelle?
Yeah, what I like to share is that, similar to Corey, pre-COVID, there was already existing information out there to support well-being of employees through our environmental health and safety department. Once COVID hit, you had a lot of resources about resiliency and working remotely and being inclusive. And then what happened after George Floyd killing, we really put together some racial justice intranet sites that allow them to have books, articles, videos. We built a knowledge board that allows you to have these micro learnings that allow you to talk about empathy or what is it to be anti-racist, lots of things about being cultural competency, things of that nature. And then we also talked about, and we have done, is putting together courageous conversations. And so our managers, we not only just kind of put them out and say, hey, have a conversation. What we did was we provided them with tools like facilitator guide, what questions to ask, what should the flow of the conversation could be like to demonstrate that for them. We provided manager information sessions for them to be able to ask their questions before they go into a conversation with their team. But I think the key that's really working for us is that we've paired them with a racial justice, promoting racial justice coach. And so they're not going it alone, at least for the first one. And so that they get comfortable with this conversation, because we've identified or recognized that this conversation about race is not only rare in the workplace, but it's not something easy for people to talk about in general. And so we wanted to set them up for success. And it's been fairly successful over the last, I guess about a month or so now that we've been hosting them. And they've been increasingly, managers have been getting on to these weekly info sessions saying, hey, I want to have this conversation. How do I do it? So We're really excited about the engagement that we've had from our employee base.
You could argue, we talk about this notion of pre-COVID and post-COVID, I think, but this wave of racial injustice with the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor have ushered in a new wave of activism. What I'm hearing you talk about with these courageous conversations is that, yes, they are sometimes uncomfortable. Yes, you need a leader, but they need to be had, because that kind of conversation is what grassroots activism starts with. So, TeNita, you had mentioned earlier about the letter, and I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because that was a move that you would consider activism, even though you were by yourself. You wasn't at a protest or anything like that. You were just sharing your point of view. So would you tell the audience a little bit more about what you did and how you decided to do it and what the results were?
Definitely. So it kind of started from a conversation that I had in my household. It was a conversation with my mother, my father, and my younger brother. He's 30 years old. So right after the video release of Ahmaud Arbery being killed, we just had an open dialogue. When things like this happen in our community around the world, we talk about it. And so it was a safe forum. It was with people that I love. And to hear my brother's perspective as a Black man, it hit me in a different way. So that's my home life. Corporate, I work in corporate America. I speak up for my segments every day, people with disabilities, veterans, and Asians. So as he was talking, I said a silent prayer. God, how can I use my voice? I work in diversity and inclusion. I advocate for people all day long, but I found that I wasn't advocating for myself as a Black woman. Yes, we have a segment, we have a women's segment. Yes, we have a Black segment. Those aren't my segments, but I wasn't really advocating for myself. So said a silent prayer, move on. It's Monday. My boss reaches out to me. He sends me a message. Now we're in COVID, we're at home, and we have like check-ins. And he said, how are you doing? And I said, great, I'm having a good day. And then he said, a lot of stuff is going on in the world. He caused me to slow down. And I said, oh, he really wants to know how I'm doing. Not the just, oh, I'm good, a smile on my face, keeping it pushing, because we have to like reflect, like, how are you doing? Sometimes if I'm good and we move on. But when he said that, I just let him know I'm not doing good. And I shared the conversation the day before that I had with my family. And he said, TeNita, I think you have some perspective that the team would benefit from. And I said, okay, I didn't think anything else, and I moved on. Then George Floyd died or was killed like the week later. And so we just had days of dialogue, and I was just like, well, what am I going to say? Like, and I didn't think about the prayer. I didn't think about, it was just more so like, we're at home, we're watching it, we're dealing with COVID. So it's like many layers, things being added on. And so at that point, I had a conversation with my vice president. She sent out an email to the team, and we were going to discuss structure, organizational structure. But with these things that are happening, people are leaning in. They want to know what their leaders are going to say. They want to know what the organizations are going to say. So when I saw the email said organizational changes, and George Floyd was just killed maybe 2 to 3 days before, I was like, ooh, I kind of felt like we missed the mark there. But then the next day for the meeting, she said, the current climate, and we have to give people grace. So I felt that it was a mismark to discuss organizational changes when people are being killed, when we're having protests and different things. But when she said we're going to talk about it, I was on a call with 60 people, and I gave my honest opinion how I felt. And from that, I was getting text messages and people saying, thank you for your input. And people said, I don't know what to do. And I said, I don't have all the answers, but it allowed for an honest dialogue. The next day was days of dialogue with my D&I team. 30 minutes before, I grabbed a pen and paper and I jotted down my thoughts. And it was raw, it was real, and I was vulnerable. And I shared it with my team. And just really quickly, one of the premises was that as a kid in my community, we're told that it's better to be seen than heard. I come to work every day. I do the work, so you see me. I haven't been speaking with honestly how I felt, because I don't know if people can really handle my truth, my pain, my fear. And when I said that, it just all emotions. We all started sharing, and it was an honest dialogue. And from there, I feel that I've been heard. Team members have reached out, hey, TeNita, I have a question, I don't understand. And I said, I don't have all the answers. We're gonna get it, sometimes we're gonna get it right, get it wrong, but to have those uncomfortable conversations. We have a work relationship. We trust each other. Let's be honest. And so from that, I've been on different initiatives and just been open to like use my voice. So that's pretty much the premise behind it.
I think it's amazing that you stepped up to that challenge, particularly because this hit you so close to home, you know, especially having a brother. And I also, I wonder if, you know, is it your manager who came to you asking you?
My manager, my director.
Yeah, that extra question of how are you really doing? I think is really the thing that can unlock some of those dialogues. Is that right?
It's correct. He caused me to stop because for so long, in my community, we deal with trauma, we deal with pain, but we get up and go to work with a smile on our face every single day as women, as single mothers, and not just women of color, but women, the women on the call, we have kids, we're multitasking, we're in a COVID environment. Mothers have to be, mothers and fathers, they have to be the mother, the teacher, the full-time worker, the therapist, and it's a lot. So when you say, how are you doing? I smile and say, I'm good, but he slowed me down and I'm thankful for that.
Incredible. Jana, I want to ask you, I know that it's tough for managers like TeNita when they may not share that lived experience and are coming from a place of privilege. How do you think managers can be more sensitive to employees sharing those kind of experiences? Is there additional questions that they can ask? We just talked about how are you really doing, but what else can they do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, that is super powerful, TeNita, and appreciate you sharing with us. And also, I do want to recognize that I know that I'm coming from a place of privilege. And so I think that's important to recognize, just no matter management or not management. But privilege or no privilege, I feel like she used the word vulnerability. And I feel like as leaders in the organization and as employees, but especially as leaders, if you want the TeNitas to come forward and talk about those things with you, you have to be vulnerable yourself and be able to share those experiences yourself. You can't be sensitive to it if you aren't willing to be vulnerable. And if you want employees that come and tell you things and tell you concerns that they might have or issues that they might be going through, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that if you're not doing it as well. And, you know, personally, I'm doing what I'm doing because I didn't have that in the previous organization. And I didn't feel like I could be vulnerable like TeNita because the leadership team wasn't vulnerable to me. And so at the end of the day, I ended up leaving that organization, and that could have been prevented. And so I think, you know, if as long as people are telling their truth and being able to share their experiences as a whole, not just employees, but managers, I think that it could really, really be helpful to your organization. It can make people feel more comfortable, make them feel more safe, make them feel like they have a voice, that they can be heard. And so I think the vulnerability is really huge.
Thank you for sharing that as well. I want to just, we're almost at the half hour here, so I want to invite Nick back to do our station ID.
Hello, everyone. Just wanted to remind anyone that joined this webinar in midstream or after the intro that we are from day one. And today we are exploring bridging the voice gap. Sponsors today are Speakfully, Lumapps, and Achievers. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, including right this second, and we will answer as many as we can when the Q&A starts, which is in about 30 minutes from now. Thanks again, and back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. So the other thing that I was thinking about as you all were talking about, you know, vulnerability, you know, we are in this era of many of us working remotely. And I think what a lot of people don't recognize is that microaggressions and bullying still exist, that speaking over people in meetings still exists. And so there's this other thread of activism that needs to be encouraged. And so my question to all of you is, how do you encourage those people who have had experiences like that, or just may have a dissenting opinion because they may sit on a different side of the political spectrum or the religious spectrum or wherever? You want everyone to feel like they belong, but everyone is unique. So Corey, I'd like to start with you. How do you first ferret out if anyone is feeling bullied or has experienced microaggressions?
It's interesting. By the position that I'm in, employees know to come to me apparently if they have challenges or issues. I mean, like when you're the global head of, or you're in the inclusion and diversity position, period, I think people seek you out as a safe space, as a good place to start a conversation, particularly if you're part of a marginalized group. And then also kind of wearing the two hats of also being part of HR, which is also a part of confidentiality as well. I think, so part of it is the position and role has created space for people to be able to naturally come. And also they know that, if you know me personally, that I'm also a person who's willing to intercede on someone's behalf. And I think that's the key thing is, do people feel like they have a place they can come and be honest about their experience, but also, what are you gonna do about it? Because often, sometimes people make complaints or people will say something, they will speak up, and you feel like no one has done anything as a result. And so I work with the employee relations team as well. We do investigations too. So anytime anyone makes a claim of feeling bullied or mistreated or discrimination, when we have a legal responsibility, responsibility legally as a company, because of our morals and values as a company, to do something at least to initiate conversation. So I encourage people to utilize the resources that are put in place at companies to actually help in these kind of situations. So that's HR, people who are in diversity and inclusion, find people that you can trust. And sometimes it's not your manager, unfortunately, but utilizing those resources are important.
Nichelle, what would you say to that? I mean, some people might still be reluctant to come forward, even though they can be talking behind a screen or just on a phone. So that might make it easier than speaking face to face.
Yeah, I think part of it, and Corey hit on it a little bit, is trust, right? One of my key things is putting people's mind at ease. Let's talk about it. Let's, and kind of take the emotion part of it out so that we kind of can talk through the facts and listen to what the opportunities are to have change. When there is an issue, though, it is our obligation to report it and investigate it and make sure that it's taken care of. I think one of the key things that we've seen is teachable moments, is what I like to call them. When you're having conversations with people, there's a nice way of saying, well, wait a minute, do you realize what you're saying? That's a microaggression. You might want to rephrase it this way or that way, because people just simply don't know, right? They use phrases and we get kind of in our habits of saying things, and we don't really realize that we could be offensive to someone. And so it's important to educate as well.
Erin, what do you see as HR's role in creating those spaces? Have you had anyone come to you reporting anything?
Absolutely. I had the benefit of being in a small organization of less than 100. And so being a small department in a small organization, I get the benefit of really knowing everybody and being able to recognize some of those things, even sometimes before they recognize themselves, and being able to hit them proactively. But yes, I think that, Nichelle and Corey both said it needs to be a safe space. I am the person that they're going to come to if they have an issue. So making sure that there is that trust and rapport there, and building an HR department that is known for making sure that they react and they handle things properly and confidentially, and so that trust in that space is there so that people can come to us. And then as regard to leadership, our leadership need to create that safe space as well. So making sure they're educated on how to recognize these types of microaggressions and these situations so that they can go in proactively when possible, and then obviously react properly and make sure that there's some action taken when needed. And I think a lot of times, to Nichelle's point, it is education. When it comes to microaggressions, a lot of times there's some ignorance and people don't recognize what it is that they're doing or what it means to others. So you have to be aware of that and just educate them so they understand what it is they've actually, the impact they've had on somebody.
TeNita, have you had experience with having these teachable moments as well, heading up what you do?
Have been in D&I, HR, I receive emails all the time. And so initially when I receive an email, I like to talk to the person, get on the phone with them, and just be a resource. If I don't have all the answers, I can point them into the right direction. Or I can collect the information and let them know, let me look into it, let me find out. But everything that was mentioned before, it has to be a safe place. We are in HR, so we have to follow compliance, but being who we are and the work that we do, people come to us all the time. So it's just being a trusted resource for people.
Jana, I'm going to put you on the spot because among my panelists, you're the only CEO. And you know that I said at the top of the discussion that CEOs, thanks to this new report out of UC Annenberg School, that CEOs can be change agents, that people believe that that's where it starts. So my question to you is, what do you see as the chief's responsibility to foster a sense of activism and foster a culture where people feel like they can report when something goes wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly think it is a requirement. I mean, any of these things that that HR is implementing, that is talking about having employees having a safe place and allowing them to feel heard. And I feel like it has to come from top down because otherwise people won't believe it. They just, if they see the CEO, if they see their leadership, their senior leadership, you know, having these conversations, like even having these hard conversations that we're talking about on an ongoing basis, they understand then that the CEO is wanting to know if those things are happening to them. Again, this all goes back to the vulnerability thing, right? So it's like the CEO being vulnerable and, you know, wanting to know the things that are happening within their own organization so that they can actually make change. I think to Corey's point earlier, he was talking about actually action being taken, like actually doing it, not just talking about it, but doing it. And I think it's really telling when the CEO or the senior leadership are the ones that are actually showing that they want to take action. They want to implement these things that people feel safe and feel heard coming forward. And so I honestly think it has to happen if they want it to actually work. Otherwise, it's just going to fall through and maybe it'll work for a little bit, but not fully. And then, you know, it's just kind of, you have to have it in order for it to, as a whole organization to be effective.
Well, we've certainly seen a lot of companies step forward and specifically recently express their support for Black Lives Matter. And, you know, as you say, like you have to take action in order for it not to be a box checking exercise. So I have a specific question for Corey, Nichelle, and TeNita, because each of your organizations are spearheading initiatives that continue to do work that supports diversity and inclusion outside the organization as well. And so how are you all, what are those initiatives and how are you keeping momentum? Corey, let's start with you.
Sure. So one of the big initiatives that initial forum that we have with 700 people galvanized is that if there was an interest from employees to want to do something for our merchants and our customers who are diverse. And so next month, the Mobilize Group, along with people across various different departments, Groupon for the first time are celebrating National Black Business Month. And for us, it was part of going back to scratch. We actually identified more than 1,000 merchants who are on our platform who own Black-owned businesses. We're running a series of workshops virtually with the National Black Chamber of Commerce, different governmental agencies to help minority-owned businesses figure out how to get money and other resources to survive right now. And so we're thinking about all these various different ways that we want to partner with merchants, make certain that they're successful. The current statistic is that 41% of all Black-owned businesses will not survive throughout this whole COVID pandemic. And so our job is to make certain as many businesses thrive and survive, even if they're not on Groupon's platform. We want to connect them to resources and do whatever we can. Also, even iHeartRadio, which owns radio stations around the nation, are working with us to actually, and throughout the month of August, talk about Black-owned businesses that are on Groupon's platform to help them generate business.
Nichelle, want to go next?
Sure. You know, I think it's important that this is not just a moment in time, and that we really take a look at it more like a heartbeat, right? Steady, right? And we don't want it to stop. And so therefore, as an organization, we're really driving to embed this into what we do every day. How does our day-to-day jobs and responsibilities look different now that we have more education and knowledge, that we're more transparent, that we're more sensitive and open to different viewpoints and ideas around racial justice, all justices, social justice, equity overall. And so what we've done is part of our strategy is the marketplace, really working with our customers, our suppliers, as well as working with our community. And we have a number of different initiatives, but one of them is working with the historically Black colleges and universities. How do we work with them and partner with them, not only to recruit and hire diversity, but also feed into them to replenish, right, the funnels so that there are available candidates to apply for jobs at Siemens and other places as well. And so it's really important for us to connect not only what we're doing in our innovation, but back to the community. And then working with our customers. I think we'll have a better view of all the different customer types that we work with a lot better now that we've had a little more deeper dialogue about culture, about empathy, about understanding different viewpoints. And I'm really excited about where this is really going to take us to stay moving forward, right? Keep the momentum. And like I said, keep that heartbeat going.
TeNita?
So within diversity and inclusion, we've been doing the work. We have a Black segment, so we have strategy, we have sponsorships, we have a lot of different opportunities. But what is different now is that this is not just a D&I conversation. This needs to be a conversation in all business units across the business, at all levels. So we have had a discussion with our CEO. He had a panel discussion with some Black leaders throughout the organization. But one thing that I like is to find new ways to amplify different leaders, not just our Black leaders at a certain level. Let's speak to Black people at all levels. Let's speak to our employees, because we all have a story to tell and we all have a voice. So one thing is finding unique ways to share stories and to get that done. So we're taking our days of dialogue, amplifying it and taking it to another level. I've been seeing different business units hosting various webinars with their employees and just having the conversation, just sitting down and having a dialogue. It's been different races and just asking questions, having the conversations, and just amplifying different voices. One of the initiatives that I'm personally on right now, I'm more of a D&I consultant for this, but our HR, T University, that's where we do all of our trainings. We're looking to have an anti-racism training. So right now we're figuring out the why. What segment are we going to start with? And we definitely feel that we need to stick to the Black segment right now, because we need to understand, why are we here? We're here due to COVID. We've been at home, the racial injustice, the deaths, and we are here. We're having these conversations. I can think back to years ago, we wouldn't be having these conversations. So we need to use the momentum and just be vulnerable as a business and as a company and continue to do the work, have diverse people at the table, using their voices, making sure that it's a safe place where they can be heard, and just working together, because this is not a work that's isolated, that can be done by one group of people, one person, one department.
I want to explore this notion of conscious conversations, courageous conversations, if you will, a little bit more deeply, especially as so many organizations are having them now around race, around gender, and similar topics. What I'm thinking about, though, is you know, certainly all of us here are of a similar opinion, but in any organization, there are going to be those dissenters. And, you know, we love as humans in general to surround ourselves with like-minded people. Feeds that confirmation bias, does little good things to the brain. But when we're faced with somebody who's got a radically different opinion than we do, regardless of their lived experience, then all of a sudden that conversation becomes very challenging. So for those people, and I hesitate to call them dissenters because that would assume that the conversation is all of a piece. But what do you do to draw those people out and in to courageous conversations? I'm going to put you all on the spot here. So somebody raise your hand and go first.
Hear me? Yeah. So what I was thinking was, when I look at it, you have to meet people where they're at, right? And so if I'm down the road and I get it and I'm all for it, I can't just immediately come into somebody who doesn't understand or is seeing a different point of view. So I go back to what we talked about earlier. It's let me listen, right, to what they're saying and hear them, and don't try to convince them or change their mindset right away. Just listen to what they're saying, because they may have some viewpoints, but they may be missing some knowledge points that will let them see from a different view, let them come to a different conclusion. And so I start with listening, and then we start having a dialogue, a conversation where they're at. And it's not just maybe one conversation, it may be multiple conversations over time, asking questions. They ask me questions. Well, what is it that you want more clarity on, right? And so if you can get them to just stop a moment and listen, and vice versa, I think you can have a more robust, courageous conversation. That doesn't mean all of a sudden they're going to be changed, right? Or see it from your viewpoints. Oh, I get it now. I'm good to go. But at least you know that they're walking around with a little bit more understanding from a different view.
I would offer two things, I think, for how we've gone about trying to do courageous conversations in light of everything happening in the world. So I'll talk about what we're doing more, a larger employee base first. Some of the employees, one of the 4 action groups, I think the Listen group, decided to create an anti-racism book club. Now, it is not the end-all be-all answer to everything. However, there has to be a starting place to which people can start to do some introspection and to kind of understand, first of all, their own challenges and how they show up, and also engage in conversations with others. So I think as of today, we have over 400 employees who've signed up to be part of this ongoing book club. I think right now we've chosen White Fragility as the first book. Again, not the end-all be-all answer to everything, but it has to be a place for particularly people who are not comfortable talking about race to at least be able to do some reading and getting engaged in conversations. So we have the options of a small group discussion with 5 to 7 other employees. Some people, that's not comfortable for them, so they have an accountability partner if they're going through the book. But the CEO and I, Erin Cooper, we're doing 2 global sessions on the book, one in August and one in September, dividing the book in half and having a global conversation, which is the CEO and myself, about the topics, and more importantly than the book, how it applies to Groupon's environment and culture. So that's one area, is to kind of do something that all employees can engage in. The second thing about courageous conversations we're doing is stick to the facts. So one of the things I'm doing right now is running diversity numbers by department, by division, by people manager and director and above, and have conversations as, hey, this is what our trends are. Let's have a conversation about what's happening here. It's courageous because it's facts, and you can't debate facts. And so it's starting people to have conversations about, yeah, why is it that even looking at gender, there's a greater balance at the lower levels, but when it gets to people managers, it's a third, and when it gets to director and above and people of color, why it's non-existent at the C-suite level. So forcing people to engage in conversations that are uncomfortable, but requires people to really dive into what's happening here is 2 ways of doing it. So either the book club as an entry point, or in some ways going to facts and data, what's happening within your organization, and encouraging people to have the dialogue.
I really like what Corey said, the piece as far as dealing with facts and numbers. So yes, we are having more initiatives. Yes, we're having more conversations, but there's still a group of people that want to know, okay, what about myself? What opportunities are we going to have from this? So like Jana mentions, it starts from the CEO down. She's having conversations with her team. I bet that she's encouraging them to speak with their teams as well to ensure, like, are we hiring the right candidates? Does our pipeline look diverse? Where are we looking for our talent? So those are things that we may have to start from the beginning. We may have to say, is this structure actually working? Corey mentioned the facts. Yes, we may have a high number of a certain employees, but what level are they in the organization? Is that diverse? What is the gender? It's all different ways to look at within our actual pipeline to ensure that we're actually doing the work, not just saying like, look what we're doing. We gave money here, but what are your employees saying? What are the surveys saying? Are the managers actually listening? Do you have an employee that may not be using their voice in a group discussion, in a Zoom? But as the manager, are you reaching out to them one-on-one and say, hey, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? Are you getting to know them? So I feel like as leaders, as D&I, we have to take that extra step and hold our managers and our leaders accountable.
And I think too, the biggest thing about these conversations is that they're ongoing. Again, we've already talked about this, but like this isn't just something that happens. I think Nichelle said the heartbeat. I mean, this isn't something that happens. These courageous conversations aren't just happening one-off or just when someone starts their very first day of employment, right? It's more of like an ongoing conversation, and eventually they will, to Nichelle's point earlier, eventually over time, they might start seeing things that they didn't otherwise see before. Because she's right that you're not going to have a conversation with someone and they're going to just change their mind like that. I mean, ideally that would be great, but I mean, it's not normal.
Yeah, and on top of that, I would say that when someone does finally speak up and want to tell their story or share their experience, even if it is wildly different from where you stand as an organization or as a department or a group, I think that really hearing them out, which I know we keep going back to that listening, really hearing them out, because they may be able to provide some insight that none of you have perspective on. And that insight could completely change the way that you think and the way that you decide to make a decision. But just being really open to what that is, because maybe you shouldn't be trying to persuade them over to your way and should really be listening to what they had to say, because the perspective is just so different and new that you really have to pay attention.
Yeah, that's totally true. And you know, I keep going back to that notion of confirmation bias, because we have it available to us pretty much everywhere we look. You know, social media is rife with confirmation bias. We have our little bubbles, you know, on Twitter, on Facebook, and we're only seeing the memes that, you know, play to our outrage and so forth. And so it is really important, I think, to bring in those other voices and make sure that everyone feels heard, whether or not we agree with them or not. I'm also thinking about challenges. You know, what are, as you see from where you all sit in your respective organizations, what are the biggest challenges to make sure that these conversations are ongoing, that this is a heartbeat rather than a momentary, you know, flare up of activism? What can be done to overcome those challenges? What are the challenges? What can be done about them? I'm going to go around the room again, so looking for a hand raise.
First, I think challenges are just not knowing, especially we're in this remote space now. So there's no water cooler, there's no open door to walk through. So I think just the fact of not knowing what's going on and not knowing the pulse of the organization. And so trying to get a handle on what that is and how you go about doing that. I think a lot of people have a bunch of different ways of doing that, right? I mean, some people, everyone, I think, forgets as well that employees react differently in all different situations. So even though you might think that you know how an employee would act or be in a remote setting, doesn't mean that that's how they're going to be, because it's different and it's something new. So they might be challenges that you would think someone wouldn't have, and now they actually do have. So how can you get that information from them? How do you know when that's happening? And so I think it just depends on the tools that you're offering your employees. It depends on, you know, like we talked about, following up with your employees. TeNita was talking earlier about making sure you're on an ongoing basis, following up with employees and asking the questions and listening so you know what to ask or what not to ask. But I think the biggest thing right now is not knowing if something is happening that you should be figuring out, that's what you should be doing. So I think that's kind of the biggest one I would think right now.
What are you choosing? All right. Okay, a couple of challenges. So yeah, how do you keep the energy going once everything has died down, right? So a good example is the White Fragility Book Club. Someone who's one of our employees went to a bookstore, initially could not find the book. So the person who runs the bookstore ordered 25 copies of it back in June. She says that 20 of them are still there, meaning the energy has died down. So people were really hot and heavy in June, and now we moved on to the next thing. So one of the things I found as a solution, a couple of things. One of them has been empower employees to do the work. This cannot be driven by HR, cannot be driven by DEI. Engage and empower employees to continue the work and the energy drive going. So part of that is we created a Black Lives Matter Slack room that employees have access to. So they're keeping the dialogue and throwing things in their daily to challenge one another. The employee groups, they are mobilized to go out and to come up with additional programming with support from the diversity inclusion team. So I think it's important, again, there's many places to do that. The other great challenge I would say is we talk about the lack of diversity in upper levels and positions. One of the things I found, and I say this being my own testimony, is, I never, throughout my entire career, never knew what it was required to get to the next level. And because I didn't have anyone who mentored me, anyone who connected me, I didn't even think about it as a possibility. So that's a challenge. One of the reasons I think that we don't have sometimes people in higher levels positions because we don't even know the path to get there. So something we have implemented is doing more of this job shadowing process where people of color and women are getting the opportunity to understand what does it mean to be the CFO of Groupon and have an opportunity to not just engage, but to job shadow in positions and roles that they never would have considered before. Because if you can't see it, it's hard to dream it and think about it. So part of this challenge is, yes, there are institutional things that are problems that keep people of color and women from progressing. Second part of that is sometimes people don't even know what they don't know. So part of the last thing I would say is I went through this program called Coach Diversity to become a certified professional diversity coach. So I'm actually a professional coach. You can do everything else, but I have to do it with a diversity lens because when you are part of a marginalized community, there's other barriers we often put on our own selves to keep us from progressing. And so now I'm also doing coaching with employees internally, people externally, to help people to own their careers, get over the roadblocks, and to progress.
I would add to what Jana was saying was going back to the managers. I think one of the challenges is getting the manager to say, it's okay to check in with your direct reports and ask them how they're doing. You don't always have to just be, hey, do you have that done? What's this done? Where's that? Take the time to just kind of pause and say, how are you doing? Similar to what happened with TeNita, right? And I think a lot of times what we're trying to teach managers is that we spend a lot of time at work, and that human side of people needs to be acknowledged. And I think that as managers, the challenge is you have to, have a deadline. You have some, things you're trying to meet for in terms of your goals. And I think this has really kind of brought to the surface more transparency on the human side of this, and balancing that out in a good way of, okay, yep, we do have to still get these things done, and you still work for a XYZ company, but at the same time, I know you're human, right? And I think specific training on that in the manager's curriculum would benefit quite a lot, because managers are kind of like, what do I do? How do I do this? And it's out of their norm in this setting. But now being remote, now with COVID, now with the racial injustice, now, with all these things piled up all together, it behooves all companies just to take a moment and say, wait, we realize, how are you doing? What's going on? And then let's move forward as a team to complete our goals.
Nichelle, I think that what you just described really is a perfect segue to some of the challenges that I've seen as well, which is, again, that, that need for that connection, right? That possibility for connection with us all being remote and being able to keep that pulse on our teams, and really making sure our managers know how to keep that pulse on our teams because that is something new, and it's probably a challenge that a lot of managers have never faced before. Obviously, certainly not in these circumstances specifically, but even just in general, being in a new remote space for a lot of organizations that didn't typically work remotely. So that's a huge challenge, I think, for all leadership, and for employees too. And, you know, as a nonprofit, we have a specific and really interesting challenge that we have seen, and that is that being a nonprofit that serves youth, our employees are so concerned with making sure that we're continuing to engage with our youth that we serve and making sure their families are taken care of, that a lot of our employees are really not necessarily focusing on taking care of themselves and their families, because they're so dedicated to service that they put these youth that we serve first. And so a challenge for me has been to really remind them that they have to take care of themselves and their families and utilize resources and tools that we have to help them before they can really ever help the others and the people that we serve. I love, there's a visual out there where if you put pebbles in a glass, and those represent all of the ways that you take care of yourself, then you're much more likely to be able to put the water in the glass that represents being able to take care of others. Whereas if you do it the other way around, there's no room for the pebbles because it overflows. So that's a really neat visual that I remind people of when they're trying to take care of themselves, because that's a huge challenge for us as a nonprofit, is that we seem to want to take care of everyone else first.
I just want to add to that. Sorry for my phone ringing. I just want to add to that we just had that conversation the other day about people in HR and in the support functions. They're employees too, right? And we do a lot of work just kind of pushing out all the tools and techniques and everything else that the business units need in order to keep running. But at the same time, we still have to remember, hey, we need to use some of those tools ourselves. We need to take care of ourselves, not only individually, but also as a business unit. And so we almost have to kind of go, okay, I could use that training too, not just the managers, you know.
And I just want to add one thing that I can say that I definitely appreciate from COVID is the human piece. Like, it allowed us to have meetings on Zoom, hear kids in the background, just not being so tight and buttoned up all the time. So with that, we're able to really take time to see how our employees are doing and just do the check-in. So I definitely have appreciated that. I know one challenge that I want to mention is I feel like we are trying to do too much at one time. So we're trying to throw all the segments together. Like, we're trying to check the box, like, okay, we said something, check. We had a meeting, check. But if you don't have that human piece to check in to see how your employees are doing, if you're not having that honest dialogue, if I didn't have a rapport with my boss and feel comfortable enough to be open and honest to let him know how I was actually doing and to be vulnerable, it wouldn't have happened. And so I challenge each of us to just take that extra second, take that extra minute to just check in with the people around us. It's not always your team. It could be your peer. It could be someone that you're working on a project with. I know that we have deadlines. They're not going to stop. I actually feel like I may be a little bit busier now because it's like different initiatives, different deadlines, but we do have to take care of ourselves and not loop everyone in the same category, because each segment has different needs. And so with the segment work, we have to look at the communities, we have to look at our customers, we have to look at our employees. Like Nichelle mentioned, working in HR, we're the ones doing the work, but we're customers as well. We're employees as well. So we have to consider how we feel, and taking vacation when you don't have somewhere to go and you're like just staying home. But we do have to know when it's time to like disconnect and encourage people to do that as well. But I just want to mention.
I was going to ask you, do you feel like, you said that you being vulnerable, you can go to your boss and be vulnerable. Do you feel like your boss is vulnerable to you, and that makes it easier to go to him? Is it a him or her? I don't know.
It's a him. I've been working with him for a while, so we have dialogue. To me, it was just the point where I said, oh, he really wants to know. Like, I felt at that point he was concerned. I'm not saying that he wasn't always concerned with how I was doing, but with so much that was going on, it was just like, okay. And he
showed
me to stop
asking the question.
Yes.
So I think that that's a huge thing too, is like the vulnerability. We keep talking about it, but I think that in order for like us to use these tools and come forward, you have to be vulnerable. And that's kind of how you were when he asked you that question. So I think that was.
And it goes both ways. You have to consider the timing, you have to consider the audience, and then you have to consider what you want to say. Because all truth, it's a time and a place for all truth. Like, so you have to know like what platform you're on, what time. But I would definitely say it was a lot of different variables, but it's just, I definitely appreciate him asking the question, me taking the time to go, wait, I'm not good. Like, stop saying you're good with a smile on your face. And like, you were just crying last night because you're tired of seeing this. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to help. And it's overwhelming.
Right.
So
absolutely.
We need to take a brief pause before we go on to our audience Q&A, and we have a lot of questions racked up. So I'm going to invite Nick to come back on momentarily.
Thanks so much. And thanks to everyone that's been on the panel today participating in Bridging the Voice Gap. Thanks to you for attending. And thanks to our sponsors, Speakfully, Achievers, and Lumapps. At this time, we're going to start taking some questions from our audience. Looks like we already have quite a few, but please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're in the Zoom app right now to share your questions with the panel. And I'll turn over to Lydia again. Thanks again.
Thank you. Yes, we do have a lot of questions, and some of them are directed to specific panelists. So I just want to say a little reminder is that we're going to try to answer as many of the more general questions as possible. But if you have specific questions for the panelists and we don't get to them, you can always feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn and ask those questions directly. One question that we have here, and I think this actually from Lucy is to Erin, but I think this is a good one for everyone because you've all talked about doing check-ins and doing pulse surveys. Are you seeing any burnout with all of the pulse surveys? Any recommendations to limit the burnout on those? So what say you all? Erin, you can.
Yeah, I'll start with that. So yes, so to answer Lucy's question, you have to be mindful of the burnout, right? You want to make sure that when you're asking for input, that they're ready to give that input. And if you see that maybe your participation might be low and if you're actually doing some type of measurable survey, then they may be burning out, right? Because they're not answering the questions or not participating. And then when you're doing your check-ins, I think the best way to find out how often to check in is to ask them. Ask people how often they want to be checked in with. People may not want you as the manager reaching out every day to say, how are you doing, right? That they may feel that's just unproductive. So just make sure that you're asking the questions and that you are doing it in a way that's mindful of who they are as individuals or as a group. So I do know that when it comes to the formal pulse surveys, we're very mindful of what that participation looks like. And sometimes I'll just ask before I throw one out, do you guys want to check in with me again? Do you want me to put that out there so that you guys can answer in that confidential way? And a lot of times they want that they want to get that input. But if they don't, I'm very open to that, and you have to stay open to that.
Does anyone have anything else to add, or can we move on to the next question? We're good? Tim is asking, now with most of us working from home, it must be easier to send whistleblowing concerns anonymously. Have any of your organizations encouraged anyone to bring these concerns anonymously?
I'll just say something. So I think the anonymous part that's the kind of the struggle, right? Because it's like you want people to be able to come forward to you and feel safe and feel comfortable, but then it's happening anonymously. But if it's happening anonymously, it's hard for organizations to take any action as much as if they actually knew all the information. And also, I struggle also with the idea of having employees sending things anonymously that must mean that they don't feel safe because they aren't saying who they are. So it's kind of this weird balance of how you have to, you want to be able to give them a place to be able to speak up, but also you want to be able to know the details so you can actually take action with it. So I think and then all that comes back to is having those ongoing, I think it's not something that happens overnight, but it's something where you have to have these ongoing continuous conversations with your employees throughout time so that they can start building that trust with you. So they will come forward to you without the anonymous piece. So that's kind of like with the anonymous thing, it's hard because they're not feeling safe because they aren't saying their name, but then you can't take action. So I think that's one of the hard things to try to navigate as an organization.
Thank you. We have a question from Beth, and I believe that Beth has participated in audience Q&A before, so if it is indeed you, hi Beth. I haven't heard mention about unconscious bias and how this is being addressed with various companies beyond having employees take a training course. Training doesn't necessarily change behavior. Is anyone doing anything beyond training to deal with unconscious bias?
So I guess I would say there are multiple things we're doing. You're right, unconscious bias training alone does not change culture, does not change attitudes and behaviors. We do know though that part of what causes us to have bias, conscious or unconscious, sometimes is lack of exposure, lack of experience, lack of connection to people who are different than yourselves. So two things that we implemented at Groupon. One was something called the Talent Inclusivity Program, where we required everyone who's director level and above in the company over the course of 6 months to actually engage in a conversation that was not part of a job interview and not someone already in your business org, to meet someone who's diverse. It's like a coffee meeting for 45 minutes where you had to be someone who's either a woman or person of color, kind of in the mid-career, and someone external. And so that was great data because one of the things we know is that when it comes to people who are in high positions, the higher you are in the organization, the smaller your network becomes. And also they tend to be very much like yourselves. And so this was kind of interesting because it allowed our senior leadership to meet people who were diverse, often changing their perspectives of even realizing the diverse talent that we had within the organization and externally. And it was a natural way to start conversations, ongoing conversations that has even led to when there were positions open, they went back to that new network of people they didn't have before. So that's one example of how you got to take unconscious bias and just more than a theory, and actually what are you going to do to get people engaged, particularly across cultural lines. And the second thing I'll quickly say is we've also instituted a program for diverse talent. That is a high-pole program. 15 people were selected out of many applicants to be part of a year-long experience where these 15 individuals got exposure with mentors who were senior management. They got external coaches. They got leadership seminars from people in internal and external. So part of unconscious bias process, again, is how do you engage people in doing something that's different than they've done before, that begins to open doors and that haven't been there before. And so the Great Leadership Program was really interesting because managers had to be part of it. And that's where they also got to understand how sometimes the way they've led, some ways they've managed has also contributed to why people of color and women haven't advanced in their careers.
So for us, I would jump in and say that unconscious bias is something that we definitely do spend some time on. I have the honor of serving an organization that is actually, especially for our size, quite diverse, including a Black male CEO. So we have the honor and the privilege of leading by example. Our senior leadership team is Hispanic female, 2 Black females, a white male and a white female. So we have a really cool, diverse population. And I'll be honest, within that group, we're just very open and we have very good open conversations to learn about each other and our culture and some of the things that may create some unconscious bias, and just really have good open conversations. And we find that when we lead by example that way, it automatically opens the doors for others to feel more comfortable asking some of those questions and really learning about each other to make sure that we are being very understanding of each other and the diversity that we have in our organization. So I think leading by example is just really important because it'll make those conversations more comfortable as time goes by.
One of our attendees is probably reacting to the fact that we did talk a lot about vulnerability. David wants to know, how do you convey the value of vulnerability? So is there some KPI that we can put on vulnerability, or how are we having those discussions? Is there an ROI for vulnerability?
I don't know. That's a good question. If there's an ROI, I don't know. I wish that there was. I don't know if anybody knows one, tell me. But I think what we talked about earlier is sharing experiences, whether they're good or bad. I think that in itself will be helpful for all employees when they hear that, especially we're talking about coming from like a CEO or any senior leadership, so that they can see that they're real people. And to Corey was saying earlier, how their networks get smaller and smaller, and it's more like-minded people. So if they can show their vulnerability by sharing those experiences, then they can get more people like TeNita coming forward with different things that they have to say. But I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if anybody, a KPI for vulnerability. The more experiences you can share, I think will just in itself will have a trickle down effect.
I don't know about an ROI, but I do know that if you take a look and you just take people for face value and they're there for the job and I hired you to do this and this is what you're there for, and don't really get to know them as a person, then you just kind of stay on the surface. But the minute you share an experience, share a story, or you do something together as a team, all of a sudden there's this bond that happens, right? And if you continue that network, then more and more you become more vulnerable, but yet at the same time you've been more courageous, you become more open-minded, you become more astute to the various different viewpoints around you. And I just think there is a priceless amount that you can put on that to say that human connection is important no matter what you're doing.
I would like to add, in regards to ROI, I haven't seen any great question in regards to that portion. But in regards to the whole vulnerability piece, I'm the same TeNita. If you go back a year ago, I'm doing the same level of work. The story that I share with my team, I share it with some peers. I share it with some friends. It just depends on who you are to me, what relationship we have. So I would definitely challenge the organizations, the leaders, to have those conversations to get to know people. And I've kind of said it over and over again, but I think it's really important. For example, I was at the table. So Black was not necessarily my segment. I was at the tables. If it was something like alarming, I would give my input, but was I being tapped to as a resource beforehand? Like, oh, TeNita, you're an African-American woman. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? That didn't necessarily happen. So we need to consider the people that are at the table. Is it a safe place for them to speak? Do they have decision-making skills? Are you proactively reaching to them? Or is it just a number? And you look around and you're like, look, I have a really diverse team, but are their voices being heard? Are they doing the work? Are you amplifying them? Another thing is also getting to know your people on a level to know their strengths and their challenges. And then that'll help you in regards to like, how are you gonna just help them, amplify them, give them different things to allow them to shine. So I just think it goes both ways. And once the person is comfortable in the environment, the timing, now what's next? So I also see a lot of like, wow, TeNita, and I'm like, same TeNita, it's the same person. So it goes both ways. So it's leaders and the person individually. So I wanted to point that out as well.
Well, I'm glad you said that because there's a couple of attendees that have similar questions about that vulnerability with particular regards to your example. One is asking, Sarah. Sarah is asking, do you feel like your leader or others were asking you to do yet more work to teach others and answer those questions? And then another attendee was asking the entire panel, how do you all take care of yourselves while you're doing this work? So that's a twofold thing. What do you do about being asked to do more work? And how do you take care of yourself?
So I know after just speaking up, some individuals wanted to know, like, teach me, I want to learn. And I'm a natural helping person. Like if there's a need, like I want to jump in and I want to help. And I started to do that, but then I had to realize that I was overwhelmed with my personal life and work. And then that Friday, I just had to take a mental health day. And I sent my boss a text message and I was like, because I just didn't feel like functioning. I didn't want anything on my agenda. So I canceled work and I also canceled like my personal things that I had to do as well, just to sit and reflect. And like, even if it was like silence, sit in silence, just monitoring my own mental health. I have various coaches for work. I have coaches for my career, and I have coaches for my personal life. And it's just having resources and having people where you can just tap them and you're like, I have nothing to say, I'm hurt. Like, and this is like not just vulnerability at work. This is like within yourself. Like, this is a trigger for me. Initially, when I read that letter, at the end, I said, I don't want to be too boisterous. I don't want to make them mad, and I don't want to lose my job. Initially, at the end of the day, I did not want to say the wrong thing. And so with that, it brought another anxiety to the situation, but I just had to pray, let it go, because I knew it came from a good place. At this point, if they don't know me as a person, then that's unfortunate. And I had to kind of like own that and say, I said what I said. I am who I am. I'm here to do the work. I show up every day. And so I didn't want to like take on like the what if. So for me, I just had to like pray about it and let it go. And I do have resources that I definitely tap.
What all else do you do to take care of yourselves? Anyone else want to jump in for that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, we're going
No, go, please, go.
I think one of the things, to go back and forth and commute, you know, from a brick and mortar to the home and back and forth, it kind of gave you that downtime. You're driving, whatever, you know, you maybe make a few errands. And now that my commute is like 1 minute, right? I had to get, here's my work, and I'm leaving work and I'm going home, and I'm not really coming back to this spot until I'm back at work. And so I had to make boundaries to really kind of have that division. Otherwise, I'd sit here for over and over and over again, right? And so I really had to kind of get into a routine where it's like, no, it's okay to go watch TV, right? You're off work, it's past 6, you know, get up, go, you know, have dinner, go outside, do something. And so I think it's important to really take a good look at, you know, what is my routine? What's healthy for me? How do I keep things in balance, whether it's, you know, work and play, right? And so that you have that mental break and you're not constantly in work mode because it's right here now versus, oh, I got to go to work, right? You know what I mean? You get kind of teed up when you're driving to someplace versus where you kind of decompress as you're driving back home. I don't have that. So I think my main point here is really take that time for yourself and put boundaries for you, and then make sure people don't overstep those boundaries, because somebody like, hey, can we meet? You know, because they're right there too, right? It's easier just to go, oh, let's get on, you know, because I don't have to worry about any kind of buffer or things that'll get in the way, because it's all right here at my fingertips. And so it's important to have balance.
So I'm gonna be 100% transparent and say it is a tough time to be a person working in inclusion, equity, and diversity, inclusion, and equity. I can't even say the term anymore. And the reason it's been tough is, with everything that has happened, there is a great demand from companies, your own company, external companies, to do something, to do a lot of activity right now. And in the process of doing that and coming up with answers, and you know, I've had to help craft emails that's coming out from senior management team to employees externally, all that kind of stuff. There's been little space and time for Corey, and for Corey to actually deal with his emotions and how I feel in society. And that's just the truth. And it's tough to separate it because it's also my job. So those of us who work in diversity, inclusion, and equity, we can't complain that women can come into us, because that's actually the job. And this is kind of a hot time for people in this space. And so what I have found to be most helpful is I have a friend who's head of medical in Montgomery County, Maryland, and we talk. You have to have someone external who's not in your job to have conversations to keep yourself from going crazy. People you can be honest with, and you know, there were conversations that I have that I could never repeat them to the people watching today if I want to keep my job. But you need to have those kind of people that you can go to and be real and talk about your real experience and get it out of your system, so you can go to sleep and wake up the next day and do it all over again. You have to have external people not in the job to talk about your job and to also listen to the other craziness that people around you are also experiencing right now. Because all of us are experiencing craziness. We're in your jobs, living in society, never mind, I'll stop there. There's a lot of insanity going on around us, is my point. And so you have to have an outlet to have these conversations and kind of work through it together.
Yeah, and Corey, I'll tell you, I'll be honest, you know, and I'm so glad you were so open and transparent about that. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at taking care of myself. It's just not who I am as a leader, as an employee, as a mother, I'm just not good at it. And so I have to work at it. And one of the things that I do goes back to what Nichelle said. I need those routines, especially being at home, to have that separation and to be able to step away. I do have a dedicated office, so fortunately I can leave that behind. I do find myself wanting to check my phone and check Outlook on my phone at 9:30 at night, and I have to stop myself. So, you know, really being open to that and putting those boundaries in place. And then also, you know, for me, it has been overwhelming. I'm a very small HR department, and I have all my normal, wonderful day-to-day and my normal, wonderful strategic, and then I got COVID, and I got social injustice, and I got DE&I, and so it all hit me, and I have to balance all of that and make sure that I still get the day-to-day done, make sure I get my strategic plan executed, and then also make sure I'm addressing those things and handling those things that have come up for our time. So I'm not good at it. I'm not going to tell you I am. I do try and lead and show a good example, but I need my support system. Just like Corey said, you know, fortunately I have a wonderful, understanding spouse who's also in leadership, and he's a fantastic buffer for me to be able to just sit down in the evenings in front of the television and just vent or unload or whatever it is I need to do that day to really get me ready for the next day. So support system is just so important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I actually am kind of in a different, I live by myself with my dog, so she's here too, but so I kind of have a different issue in the sense of my brain can't shut off. There's no shutting off because I'm always by myself for the most part. So when you're by yourself and then you leave, if you walk away from my desk, or even if I'm doing something later, like it's always going. You're always in your own head because you don't have the conversations as often. There are definitely times that you can call. There's people that I can call, absolutely, to be able to have those conversations. So for me, it's about being intentional about knowing the things that I can do so that my brain turns off, which sometimes is just a mindless TV show that I know that I can engage in. Sometimes it's a glass of wine, sometimes it's exercise, but I know that those are certain things that I can do where like my brain will shut off at least for a short period of time. And so it's just being mindful of putting those into my day-to-day.
I think we have time for one more question, and this actually came from two different people asking a similar question. Tony specifically is saying we're currently in company-wide DEI training. Majority of the book clubs, podcasts, media have voluntary participation. Since we are a small company, it's pretty obvious who's absent from these activities. How do we engage these folks meaningfully and hopefully get them on board with showing up? A lot of times these learnings are driven by marginalized folks. How do we get the older cis white men to want to attend? Other strategies for reaching them. Corey's got his hand up.
I'll make it quick and simple. Your senior management team has to be involved. They set the example. If your leadership is not engaged in whatever the efforts are, then it gives employees the out. So you got to get the CEO and others to be part of it and lead it. And if you need strategies and help how to do that, send me a message on LinkedIn. I've found ways to strongly encourage senior management to get involved.
And I think if you ever do figure out that ROI of vulnerability, you might toss that in to get senior management on board with that. Okay, well, I guess we do have a lot of time for another one. Kim is asking, what are some different ways in order to find out how employees are feeling? And I think that she's asking beyond those pulse surveys or just asking the question. Are there any other tools or platforms or anything that you all could use to find out how people are feeling?
I think for us, one of the great tools is our Yammer page. I heard somebody else mention Slack, but similar to that is, you know, we do a lot of all the traditional things, but this Yammer page, you know, our CEO posted something that kind of just was really about her personal journey and impact of what's happened. And from there, thousands and thousands of employees have just kind of started the dialogue and have kept it going. And even those that were kind of, you know, on one side versus the other side of the discussion, they started talking back and forth and correcting each other or offering each other a different viewpoint. And it's been a really good dialogue that we could never even articulate, right, just by sending out a survey or something like that. It just was a natural, organic thing that's happening that we're really, really glad it's happening, because we want that at all levels of the organization to be able to dialogue. And that's one way to get through all the different layers without depending on the manager to tell their manager, to tell their manager, to tell their manager, right? The employee directly can hit right in with other coworkers and talk.
Well, I'm afraid that is all the time we have. So I'm going to ask Nick to come back on. But first, I want to say thank you to these stellar panelists for a wonderful discussion. And thanks to all the attendees for tuning in.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lydia. Thanks to all the wonderful speakers. That was a fantastic conversation. Thanks again to Speakfully, Lumapps, and Achievers. And thanks to you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, that's FROMDAYONE.co, to check out more of our upcoming webinars and virtual conferences. On Tuesday, August 4th, we have Consolidate Your HR Operations in One Portal with Kintone. Thursday, August 6th, we have New Ways of Working in a Post-Pandemic World. And just last week, we actually did our first full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, networking, and one-to-one discussions. It was amazing. First time we've ever done it. We're really excited about it. And we're going to be doing our next one in September. Again, visit fromday1.co, FROMDAYONE.co, to learn more about that and all of our online content. Thanks, everyone, and be well.